First of all, thank you for coming to tutorial. My name is Yinqian Zhang. I am an assistant professor from Ohio State University. I'm really glad you guys being here listening to my tutorial. I'm probably the first person in history that ever given a tutorial at CCS with 5 other concurrent sessions taking place. Okay, it's a joke, but for those of you who have not attended CCS very often, this is the first time CCS have 5 concurrent sessions. All right, so today I'm going to talk about cache side channels. I'm not intending to give a very technical talk today because you probably have seen a lot of such talks before, right? There are Black Hat talks or other academic conference talks. So today I'm going to focus on a high-level overview of the field, cache side channel attacks and defenses. I'm going to talk about what has been done over the years, what has not been done, what seems interesting, what seems not, and whether there are other research opportunities in this topic. And the purpose is to share some knowledge and also inspire other researchers to participate in this field, to do research along this line, to make this field strive. Of course, a bit introduction of myself. My research interest is in computer system security in general, but the focus with a special focus in microarchitecture side channel attacks and defenses. Here, microarchitecture is only a superset of the cache side channel attacks and defenses. And over the past few years, 7 years-ish, I'm fortunate to be involved in several projects related to side channels, not only cache side channels, but other types of side channels. For instance, I've published in the area of side channels in cloud computing, in mobile systems or like smartphones, or more recently in Intel SGX. So this research experience gave me opportunity to learn from my colleagues or even my students about this topic. And not only so, I'm really fortunate to have served on this following conference PC to help review the papers, and from this experience I got the opportunity to learn from other reviewers. Basically, I try to learn how the community collectively think of this field, how different researchers comprehend these new ideas, and how they envision the future of this field. Okay, so but today my talk will not based on their perception of the field. It's going to be based on completely my perception of this field of study. Okay, so I assume that you have heard of cache side channel before, or have some knowledge. Many of you, I see some very familiar faces that are expert already. But still, I'm going to talk about the very basis of cache side channel attacks. So basically about threat model. Well, historically, there has been, people usually often say there are 3 types of cache side channel attacks: time-driven, trace-driven, and access-driven. So this is a very kind of old taxonomy. But the time-driven basically means that the entire execution time of a piece of program can be observed by the attacker, and by providing different types of inputs, the attacker can conduct a statistical inference on the encryption key, for instance. And the second type of attack is typically called trace-driven. This is a very specific scenario where the attacker can learn the power consumption trees of cache hits and cache misses. And with this sequence of knowledge, the attacker can infer some secrets, such as the keys from a smart card or an embedded system. The third type is called access-driven, which is the topic I'm going to cover today. Access-driven attack typically assumes that the attacker has some logic accesses to the target system. Here, logic access is a term that is in contrast with the physical accesses. Physical access means that the attacker physically get access to the device, right? But logically means that the attacker can run some piece of code on the target device. And another requirement is that the attacker shares the cache with with the victim program. And typically, this type of attack works in the following ways. The attacker will access its own memory. Because of memory isolation, the attacker cannot directly inspect or probe the memory of the other processes or other virtual machines, but the attacker can access its own memory. And then, by measuring how long it takes to access its own memory to infer whether the memory access was served by the cache or by the memory. And this timing difference is the root cause of the cache side channel attacks. And with that knowledge, the attacker can infer how much cache is being used by the victim process. But this is the basic concept. How exactly this idea is exploited in different attacks will give us several different flavor of the attacks. And many of these attacks we have heard of are, for instance, the evict and time attack, prime probe attack, and flush and load attacks. But there are other types of attacks. I can really briefly talk a bit about prime probe attacks, just to make sure we are on the same page. So here on this slide, I'm illustrating here the table. At the bottom is illustrating a four-way set associative cache. So each column, basically, you can think of as a cache set, and each block you can think of one cache line in the cache set. And this is how we can, imagine cache is organized. Okay, how we can imagine cache is organized. And then in the prime phase, the attacker simply load his own data into the cache. Load his own data from memory into the cache to fill one or multiple cache sets or all of them. And then during the interval called prime probe interval, the attacker does nothing but simply waiting for the victim to touch some of the cache lines. And then, okay, some cache sets are being used more, some cache sets are less used by the victim. And then in the probe phase, the attacker will read from his own memory address again, and then also measure the time of loading his own memory into the shared cache, how long it takes. Okay, if it takes longer, that means more cache lines are fetched from the main memory instead of from the cache. But if it takes, well, the load time for a particular cache set is shorter, that means, well, this cache set has not been very heavily used by the victim. But this is the basic idea. With this knowledge, the attacker can learn some information about the cache usage or memory access pattern of the victim. Another attack idea is called the flush and reload attack. So in this attack, the requirement is a little bit stronger. It requires the attacker and the victim to share the same physical page. This is common in many scenarios, such as in the shared library in the same operating system. Basically, different processes have different virtual memory mapped to the same physical memory pages. And also in the virtualization environments, if the memory deduplication is enabled, it also is a possibility to share physical memory pages between two parties. So the key idea here is that if we divide a physical memory page, we know physical memory page is 4 kibytes, and if we divide it by per cache line, each cache line is 64 byte, right? There are 64 such memory blocks in one memory page. So the idea here is that in the we can call it flush phase. The attacker can use this x86 CL flush instruction to invalidate all the copies in the cache of this memory block to flush it out of the cache, to make sure it is not in the cache, right? That's the flush phase. And then again, during the flush reload interval, the attacker does nothing. And then if it so happens that the victim touches this shared memory block that the attacker just flushed, okay, if that happens, and then in the reload phase, the attacker can try to read from the same memory block again and measure how long it takes to read from this memory. And with that information, the attacker can learn whether this memory block has been loaded by the victim during this very short flush reload interval. That's the very basic concept. Okay, but there are other attack techniques. These are the two most popular, well-studied attack techniques, but there are others, like evict and time attack. So the basic idea is that the attacker flushes or evicts some of the cache sets that may or may not be used by the victim, and then trigger the victim execution. So the overall execution time can be measured, and then the attacker can use statistical analysis to try to correlate which the execution time with which cache sets it evicts in the first place. Okay, with that information, the attacker can learn which cache set has a higher probability to have been used in this cryptographic operation. So that's the very high level idea. Another example of this cache attack is the flush attack, which is very similar to the flush reload attack. Very similar, but use one CL flush to replace the second reload. I'll talk about that later. And also recently there's a prime abort attack, basically leveraging the hardware transaction memory and use the transaction aborts to replace the timer. Okay, so there are so many different attacks, but to taxonomize cache side channels, okay, my personal preference is to categorize the cache side channel attacks into two categories. One is that the two parties, whether it's VM, whether it's processes, they share the same cache sets, and this is the default setting. So here we assume the attacker and the victim share the same cache sets, okay, and then if the attack vector is a physically indexed cache. Physically indexed cache means that to determine which cache set a certain memory block maps to, you look at the physical address of this memory block. Okay, so for instance, all the last level cache are physically indexed, and if we're talking about attacking the physically indexed caches, the attacker also needs to know the virtual to physical mapping of the victim to conduct this attack. That's the assumption, right? Example of such attacks are prime probe, prime abort. Another category is basically we further assume that the victim and the attacker share the same cache line, and this is only true when they share the same physical memory. If they do not share the same physical memory pages, they will not share the same cache lines. Okay, an example of such attacks include the flush reload and the flush attacks. All right, so maybe I can conclude my talk now, but I think the purpose of this talk is not to not to tell you about the technical details of the attack. It is about, okay, over the past 10 years, what has been done in this field and what has not been done yet. So this is the agenda of my talk today. I'm going to talk about two parts: attacks and defenses. Okay. The first direction we have experienced in terms of cache side channel attacks is from the same core to cross-core attacks. Well, we cannot talk about cache attacks without talking about computer microarchitecture. So we know that the first computers usually have one single CPU core, and then in 2002, Intel introduced hyperthreading into their Pentium 4 processors. Hyperthreading basically is a proprietary implementation of the simultaneous multithreading, okay, SMT technology. And then around 2005, Intel introduced multi-core processors into their processors. The first one being the Pentium D processor, but multi-core multi-core processor has been released much earlier than 2005. I think the earliest one that I know of is from IBM, which was released from around 2001. All right, and then after 2008, Intel started to use inclusive last level cache in their processors. I will talk about why inclusive last level cache was so important. Okay, so before that, most of last level cache was non-inclusive. And then, well, interestingly, after so many years, after almost 10 years, and this year, starting this year, Intel started to introduce non-inclusive last level cache in their latest version of Skylake SP processors, the Core i9 processors. We should think about what that means in terms of cache sectional attacks. Okay, so well, if you pay a little bit more attention, you may find that the cache sectionals usually comes out a few years after the new inventions in the microarchitecture. Like the first access-driven cache sectional attacks was well demonstrated around 2005, and there are a couple of papers back then, and basically they demonstrated the SMT-enabled L1 cache attacks. Although attacks without simultaneous multithreading has also been discussed, but with simultaneous multithreading, the attacks were a lot easier. Okay, that was back in 2005, and in the next almost 10 years, all the cache sectional attacks are on a single core, And the first cross-core attacks was the flash reload attack, cross-core flash reload attacks, which was officially published in 2014, and then the cross-core prime probe attacks were published in 2015. Okay, so let's take a closer look at how cross-core attacks actually works. So the seminal work done by Yoram and Faulkner, it's called a flash reload sectional attack, was published in Unix Security 2015. And this is the first attack that showed the last level cache can be exploited, right? The key idea in this paper is to use CL flash instructions to conduct a cross-core flash reload attack, right? And this paper invented the name flash reload attacks. Okay, but not to describe this paper. I really respect this paper. But the flash reload concept of flash reload was first invented by a paper 3 years early that was published in Auckland. That should be Auckland, in 2011. But back then, this concept was only demonstrated in a single core attack without simultaneous multithreading support. Okay, but this flash reloaded on L3 cache is the first one on the cross-core, the first cross-core attack. This work is really provides a fine-grained channel that requires a memory sharing between two parties, and the granularity is finer than the prime probe attack, because the flash reload attack targets a cache line, but the prime probe attack targets cache sets. Okay, but it also interesting. There's one requirement of this of conducting this attack, which is requiring inclusive cache to propagate the cache invalidation, which is CL flash, to the other core. Okay, the idea is that if you want to make sure the cache copy of the other core is also invalidated by your CL flash, well, this paper claims that you have to do it on an inclusive cache. And this work has been followed up by a large number of papers. And the next year, there were two papers published in IEEE SMP Auckland. They are both prime probe attacks on the last level cache, and one of them attacks RSA, one of them attacks AES. Okay, different targets, but the ideas are very similar. So they take advantage of the cache inclusiveness in their cross-core prime probe attacks. Let me just briefly talk about why inclusive is a big deal here. So, as I already mentioned, the prime probe attack works in this way. The attacker first prime to make sure the shared cache is filled with its own data, right? And in this case, this is the last level cache. In this case, this is the last level cache. The attacker also has to make sure that the L1 cache on the other core is also evicted during the prime process. And this is only true when the last level cache is inclusive. So inclusive cache means that the cache copies in the last row cache is a superset of the cache copies in the per core caches, the per core L1 caches. That is, if the copy in the last row cache is evicted, the same copy in the L1 cache is also evicted. And this is the very important property of the inclusive cache that enables the prime probe attack. And also in the probe phase, the attacker can load his own memory into the cache and no matter how long it takes. So you might wonder why it is so important to make sure that the attacker during the prime, the attacker can make sure the private cache of the other core has been evicted as well. This is because otherwise the victim can make use of their remaining copy in the private cores to continue execution, and many of the information will be hidden in the private cores. So this is why the inclusiveness is very important in this type of attack. Okay, and interestingly, the year after next, in 2016, there's an Asia CCS paper demonstrate a cross-processor cache attack by using the flash reload attack that leverage the cache coherence protocol. So the key idea is just very similar to the original flash reload attack, but there is a difference here. Here in this example, CPU 0 in the reload phase, CPU 0 try to load a memory block A, and then if block A has already been loaded by CPU 1 in their own cache, then because the cache coherence protocol, the request from CPU 0 can be served by CPU 1. All right, but if CPU 1 has not loaded the block, this memory block already, and this request will be served from the DRAM, which will be slower. So the author claims this flash reload attack can work with non-inclusive cache, but really what matters is whether the cell flash instruction is able to invalidate the private copy, cache copy in the private cores of the other CPU. Okay. So what about the open research questions? Okay. Well, as we have observed in the last decades, whenever there are new microarchitecture design features, there are new requirements for the cache sidechain attacks. For instance, recently the cache line replacement policy has been changed from LRU to more adaptive policies, and how that can affect the cache sidechain attacks is some study. And there are also random replacement policy, and that will also make this prime probe attack a little bit harder, right? And also the last level cache, inclusive, non-inclusive, or exclusive, how this will affect sidechain attacks, and some internal structure of the cache, like the L1 cache banks or slices of the last level cache. That internal structure will also make the cache sidechain attack harder. How to address these challenges that is introduced, say, for instance, last level cache slicing has been studied in the past few years. And also the implementation of the cache line invalidation instructions, whether that will invalidate the private copy of the other cores, that's also a question. And also the cache coherence protocol. As far as I can tell, there are still room in this field along this direction that is helping us to better understand how this new architecture design features will affect the cache sidechain attacks. Okay, and the second direction we have observed in the past few years is transition from x86 to ARM. Well, so why ARM is important? ARM is the target of the ARM cache attacks may be the mobile devices, like Android or iOS, or ARM-powered data centers that may be prevalent in the future, right? But what are the challenges in ARM sidechain attacks? That is the question. Well, it turns out that there are many challenges. First of all, the ARM specification is not very clear. it does not very clearly explain how cache should be implemented, or cache coherence, or the cache line invalidation instructions should be implemented. It's a bit vague, and another problem is that not all the implementation really strictly follow the specification in terms of cache design, right? And we are not very clear about the cache line replacement policy, well, and the cache inclusiveness, or the coherence protocol. And also there are some instruction set differences compared to x86. For instance, there is no CL flush instruction. However, recently there has been several papers demonstrating attacks on ARM. One of them is the Unix Security 16 paper, in which the authors demonstrate prime probe attacks, flush reload attacks, and evict reload attacks. Here, evict reload attacks is a variation of the flush reload because there is no CL flush instruction. So evict reload basically help use the techniques used in prime to evict out the cache lines in the shared cache, and then perform the reload similar to the flush reload attack. And then a CCS 16 paper demonstrated were focused on the flush reload attack, and then more recently a Unix Security 17 paper studied and documented the autolog mechanism that may affect the prime probe attack on ARM. Basically, the authors look at a patent, ARM patent, and speculate that there may be an autolog mechanism implemented in many of the ARM processors. So what is the autolog? The idea is that if a cache line in the last level cache has been fetched by one core, and then as long as there is a private copy in the L1 cache, attacker running on other cores cannot prime this target cache line out of the last level cache. This is the autolog, the idea of the autologs. So the author believe that on ARM devices, because of this autolog, it is basically very, very difficult to perform the prime probe attacks. Well, so what are the open research questions in this field? Well, first of all, we really need to understand the attack vector. We really need to understand how the this cache features are implemented on ARM devices. Until now, these three papers, they have conflicting results. Well, for instance, the third paper basically say, well, it is very difficult to do prime probe attack, but it has been demonstrated by another paper. So why it happens? Why it happens? Although they conduct experiments on the same type of processors, still there are inconsistency. What really happens? We do not have the ground truth, right? Do the manufacturer really follow the ARM specification? That is also a question. But beyond the understanding of the attack vector, what really matters in this line of research is to demonstrate an attack that really matters. What that means is that what are the special targets on ARM that makes this attack really interesting? Right? We need a high impact example to show that the cache attacks on ARM-based devices like the Android phone or iOS phone that really is different from all the other side channels on these devices, and can achieve something that is not achievable by other means. Okay. The third research direction I really want to mention today is the new attack techniques. This is interesting. So these are a list of new cache attack techniques that has been invented over the years. 2005, prime probe evict time attack using SMT. And then 2007, L1 cache attack again, prime probe without SMT. 2010, L1 cache flash reload attack without SMT. 2014, CrossScore flash reload. 15, prime probe. And 16 is there's another type of cache attack called storage channel attack, which I will introduce in a minute. And the 16 flash reload, 17 prime abort, and more recently there is a paper showing that there are some other hardware features can be leveraged to conduct side channel attacks. Okay, I will try to introduce very briefly this cache storage channel attacks. It's not a timing attack, but it's a cache attack. The root cause of the problem is that on certain devices, if accessing the same physical address through virtualizers with mismatched cacheability attributes, there could be a problem. Okay. Another example is that executing self-modifying code without flushing the instruction cache. This inconsistency in the memory content may be exploited to do what? To conduct a prime probe attack without timer, without timer. And this paper basically demonstrates this type of prime probe attack without timer on a trust room device. Okay, on a trust room device. So stealing AES encryption keys from trust rooms. Okay, and also supporting the modular explanation in the same platform. Another new technique, the flash technique, is, as I said, is very similar to flash reload, and it mirrors execution time of the second flash instruction. And the key insight is that the CL flash will execute a lot faster if there is a cache hit. Otherwise, the CL flash, well, I imagine that the processor, without a cache hit, the processor will enumerate all the cache lines in the cache until it finds no hit, right? Which will take longer. And if there is a cache hit, as shown in this figure, if there is a cache hit, the CL flash execution will finish sooner. And what is the benefit of CL flash compared to flash reload attacks? One benefit is that the execution time of this attack is shorter, because reload typically involves cache miss, will take hundreds of CPU cycles, but this CL flash instruction can finish within tens of cycles. And this lower execution time than flash. And another benefit of this flash attack is that it can avoid detection by hardware performance counters. So one idea of detecting side channel attacks is to use hardware performance counter to monitor what is the rate of cache miss from this program, or what is the rate of cache hit from this program. And think about flash reload attack. Flash reload attack basically flushes the cache copies from the cache hierarchy, and then in the reload case, wait and see whether it is fetched from the memory or the cache. And many of the cases, it will cache miss will happen, and this can be detected by the hardware performance counter. But the flash attack can avoid detection because there is no reload, no reload operation. Okay. Another cache attack technique I want to introduce is the prime abort attack, which is the Unix Security 17 paper just published a couple of months ago. And the core idea is to leverage Intel's implementation of the hardware transaction memory, which is called TSX, to monitor cache line eviction. Well, one property that this paper leverages is the transaction will abort if cache lines in the right side of the transaction or the read side of the transaction is evicted from the cache. Okay, so in order to exploit this technology, the attacker can prime a cache set. Prime means read. Okay, read the cache set, so that the cache set is in the read side or the right side of the transaction, and just busy looping there and wait until one of the cache lines has been evicted by the victim, and then transaction abort will notify the attacker something has happened. Okay, something has happened. And this paper that basically shows a prime abort attack with SMT on the L1 cache and the last level cache prime abort attack. And the key difference of the prime abort attack from the prime probe attack is that there's no need of timer, right? No need of timer. As long as the abort happens, that means one of the cache lines that has been evicted, and it's relatively less noisy, and also slightly less information. Because the prime abort is really a binary information, whether one cache line has been evicted from this cache set, but the prime probe, because the timing is relative, prime probe attack can, in best case, can mirror how many cache lines have been evicted by the victim. Okay, so there are slightly less information in the prime abort attack. Well, the last paper I want to talk about along this research direction is the use of the use of the branch prediction buffer to infer secrets in SGX enclaves. That's the main contribution of the paper, right? So the idea of the paper is that the branch target buffer (BTB) is not cleansed when upon enclave exit, okay, asynchronous enclave exit. So when the enclave execution is interrupted, the branch target buffer is not cleansed. So the attacker can make use of this information to learn which branch has been taken inside the SGX enclaves. But what I'm going to focus on this slide is that a technique used by this paper, which is to use Intel processor trees, which is a hardware feature that is primarily used in program debugging. It records all the indirect control flow transfers in the target program. And not only so, it also logs the relative timing between the branch instructions. And this paper uses this feature to conduct the branch target buffer monitoring attack. But one caveat of using this feature is that it requires system privilege. So it only makes sense in scenarios like SGX. Okay. And similarly, a hardware performance counter has also been demonstrated to be used in side channel attacks. But again, hardware performance counter only makes sense in scenarios where the attacker controls the kernel. But not in SGX, because SGX will cleanse the hardware performance counter when in the enclave mode. All right, so what are the open research questions in this field? Well, some incremental improvements can be made to reduce the noise of the side channels, to improve accuracy and robustness, because no side channel is really perfect. Okay, it's not perfect. There are spaces to be improved, but this type of work is slightly incremental in my personal opinion. But what is more important is to demonstrate new attacks that leverage the cache cycle, that needs some intellectual intelligence to find out new ways to identify new ways to conduct this cache cycle attacks, and also to address some limitation of previous attacks, like the prime reload attacks. Flush reload attacks will induce more cache hits and run slower. The flush attacks simply makes it runs faster and reduce the number of cache miss. But the most, in my opinion, the most significant improvement will come from the challenging of existing defenses. If there are new technology, new techniques to conduct side channel attacks that can defeat all known existing defense, that will make the most important impact in this line of research. Challenge existing defenses. Okay, the next research direction is about the target of the attack. So what can be attacked beyond cryptographic code? Historically, in fact, most of the recent attack papers demonstrate attacks against some known vulnerable cryptographic operations like RSA, AES, ECDSA, right? And what else can be attacked beyond cryptographic code? One example is user privacy. And another example is the address-based layout randomization, ASLR. There are two scenarios. One scenario is the managed program, like JavaScript code, can infer the user space ASLR, or the native code, which already knows the program layout, can infer the kernel space ASLR. Okay, about the user privacy, there are two CCS papers, CCS 15 and CCS 16. They demonstrate this cache side channel attack can also learn some user privacy. For instance, the first paper CCS 15 paper, the spy in the sandbox, shows that with the cache side channel, it is possible to use JavaScript code to track user behavior. The basic technique to do so is to learn whether certain hardware events has happened. Okay. Another paper is return-oriented flush load attack on ARM and their implication for Android devices. Is a CCS 16 paper. Basically shows two different types of attacks. One is detecting hardware events, such as detecting the touch screen interrupts. Okay, when the interrupts happens, how many of them has happened? And another is tracing software execution paths, such as detecting the push notification in Android devices and detecting any display updates in those devices. Okay, another example of targets beyond cryptographic code is the ASR. So here I'm talking about a paper published in NDSS 2017. ASR underlying practical cache attacks on the MMU. The key idea of this paper is to use malicious JavaScript code to de-randomize the layout of browser's address space, okay, using the cache side channel attacks without exploiting any vulnerabilities. Some important key techniques used in this paper is the prime probe attack and also evict time attack to infer which part of the page table has been accessed after a page walk. Okay, during a page walk, the page table, which is is also located in memory, will be fetched into the caching structure inside of the processor, and these accesses can also be learned by cache side channel attacks. And there are some challenges faced by this paper, such as there's no fine-grained timer, and the paper studied how this can be overcome. All right, the open research questions along this line is what other secrets can be vulnerable to cache side channel attacks. This is a question that has been asked by many people. But so basically, there are limitations in the cache side channel attack. It cannot learn everything, right? For instance, the text data itself cannot be inferred by cache side channel attacks. Only the secret-dependent memory accesses, okay, secret-dependent memory accesses can be learned from cache side channels, and this secret is potentially vulnerable to this type of attacks. And still, high-impact targets will advance to this research field. And if there is an example that can show this, there are high-impact targets of the cache side channel attacks, the software and hardware vendors will pay more attention, and this will motivate the adoption and invention of defense techniques of side channel attacks. Okay, these are the open research questions along this direction. The next research direction is from native code to JavaScript code, right? So most of the early side channel attacks are conducted from C code, which is easy to understand because C runs faster and directly manipulate the memory. But how to do that in JavaScript? The consequences is huge. If one can do side channel attacks using JavaScript, so basically, the attacker only needs to launch a website and then wait until the victim visits the website and execute the JavaScript in the browser, and then some information can be leaked through the side channels, right? So the consequences are huge. There are a couple of examples. I only listed two of them. Which one is the CCS 15 paper, Spy in the Sandbox, and the other is ASR underlying NDSS 17 paper. I have already talked about these two papers already, but I want to highlight the key difficulty in conducting JavaScript attack in browsers. One difficulty is to create the cache eviction set. So how to create a buffer that using JavaScript to evict certain cache sets, because you do not know the physical address or the virtual, or even the virtual address of these JavaScript objects. how do you align them to load them into a specific cache set? This is one key research challenge. Fortunately, it has been addressed by most of these existing papers. And another difficulty is the high-resolution timer, because this prime probe attack is a timing attack. It requires a high-resolution timer. And the performance now is a JavaScript API, but recently it has been the granularity of JavaScript of performance now has been reduced to about 5 microseconds, which is not enough to conduct fine-grained side-channel cache attacks. So this NDSS 17 paper, one of the contributions of this NDSS 17 paper is to find new ways to construct timers. Okay, this is also another direction to make innovation in this field. So basically, what they did in this paper is to derive two methods. One is called timing to tick, and the other is called shared memory counters. Shared memory counters is easier to understand. So basically, you run another thread using JavaScript in the background to maintain a software timer that is keep incrementing, and use a shared memory counter to notify the other attacking thread that this timer has expired. Okay, and then another idea is the timing to tick. So this idea is kind of cute. So it first triggers some operation and then keeps reading the performance now API. Because the granularity of this API has been reduced significantly, so most of the time you just read the API and get the same result. But once you observe a change, and then you can count how many times you have called this performance now API before it changes. And this can help you to reconstruct a timing channel. Okay, about open research questions in this field. Well, the first question is attacks. How do we do attacks from other non-native languages? Right. Basically, this existing work has shown that we can do attacks with JavaScript, but what about others? Other programming languages that do not have CL flush instructions, that is difficult to create the eviction buffers, and maybe without high-resolution timers. And examples include Java or JavaScript in a non-browser setting. So why they are important? We know that in some of the managed cloud services, there are Java applications or JavaScript applications that are shared with other tenants, right? How to do such an attack in this context is an open research question. And another direction is how to attack non-native languages. So far, I don't think I have seen any work that can extract information from a non-native language. Basically, they mostly targeting the native code. The targets of attack are native code. But attacking non-native languages involves many challenges. And one of them is that the memory management in the runtime is sort of complex. And again, the target may be the management cloud applications like the platform as a service cloud or microservices. Right. Another direction I want to highlight here is to attack strong isolation. This is what makes cache attack more interesting and what motivates research direction in the past few years. So there are two categories of strong isolation. One is virtualization-based isolation, and the other is isolation using trusted execution environments. Trusted execution environment (TEE) examples are SGX, Intel SGX, or ARM TrustZone. Well, first, the CrossWEA side-channel attacks. So there are two different flavors. Prime probe attacks against CrossWEA prime probe attacks. The earliest work along this line is a same core attack, using the single core attack do the prime probe attack that demonstrate that information can be leaked across the VM boundary. And later attacks show that even cross-core, this information cross-VM attack is possible. All right, and another flavor of this cross-VM side-channel attack is the flash reload side-channel, which requires the cross-VM memory deduplication. Deduplication is a technique that is implemented in many hypervisor and operating systems. So the key idea is that there is a mechanism periodically examining the content of the memory pages, and whenever they see that two memory pages have exactly the same content, they will be deduplicated and merged together into the same page. And if this mechanism is enabled in the cloud, this flash reload attack can also be conducted in the CrossWEA and public cloud setting. To my knowledge, most of the major public cloud vendors do not have the memory deduplication, but maybe there are some small vendors that still enable the memory deduplication. Okay, I think this is state of the art. About SGX side channel attacks, we have seen 3 papers this year using cache side channels to attack SGX enclaves. One of them is to use prime probe attack in the L1 cache with the support of SMT. Another is prime probe attack on the last level cache, and also the prime probe attack on the L1 cache without SMT but with frequent interrupts. Okay, you may wonder, well, these are all prime probe attacks. Can we do flash reload attacks on these devices, on SGX? The problem is that SGX do not allow physical memory sharing inside of enclave. So the flash reload attack typically cannot work. But there are other ways to conduct flash reload-like side channels. And one of the papers will be presented in this conference on the 3rd day. It's called leaky cauldron. Okay. About trust zone side channel attacks. One paper called True Spy has demonstrated a prime probe attack against the trust zone secure word from the normal word. And basically, the paper demonstrates there by implementing a kernel module or Android application, AES key can be extracted from the secure word. The paper demonstrated attack on a single core Cortex A8 processor on a development board, but it has not demonstrated attack on a real mobile device, on a real say Android device. This paper I've already mentioned before, which is the cache storage channel attack. It demonstrated a attack against trust zone secure word. Similarly, extracting AES keys or RSA keys. But what are the open research questions in this direction? First of all, there has been many studies along this line. Really, this is what people cares most about. Attacking against strong isolation is what people cares about. And one direction is cloud computing. There has been many attacks against public cloud already. And they actually show experiment in the real public cloud, like Amazon EC2. But still, there needs a very strong evidence to show this attack is practical against the real targets in the public clouds, so that we can convince the cloud provider this is a real problem. Right? Still, we have not seen a real target, a real example, convincing example in this space. About the trusted execution environments, we have seen most of the side channel attacks has been replicated on the SGX case. But targeting those non-vulnerable software is not that interesting, right? So new research needs to be done to find other vulnerabilities, new vulnerabilities in the trusted execution environment that is unique to this environment. And also a real-world cache side channel attack against the trust zone is missing. So here, real-world, I mean the target is not developed by the authors, right? A real target that of the cache side channel will make this attack more interesting in this field. Okay, that's basically so much about the side channel attacks. I'm going to switch gear to the defenses. Over the past 10 years, many researchers have dedicated to design new hardware features or modify the operating system or hypervisors to defeat this type of side-channel attacks. There are several directions. The first one is called cache partition. Okay, hardware solutions to perform cache partition is basically redesign CPU cache and then run simulation to show that performance really good. So partition cache basically means separating the cache lines or cache sets that are belonging to different parties that do not trust each other. And one difficult, there are many existing work along this line, and the early work was done by Wang and Li from Princeton. They jointly developed several new cache designs defeating various types of cache side channels. And this work are followed up by many other research papers, which I only listed a few of them. But generally speaking, they all follow one principle, that is partition the shared cache. However, we have not observed any such inventions being adopted by the hardware vendors. It will take some time. Another line of research is the system-level partition, and there are two types of partition. One is spatial partition, and the other is temporal partition. In terms of spatial partition, the key idea is to dynamically or statically partition the shared cache by modifying the operating system or the hypervisor. There are several papers that has been done in this field, and particularly the first three are conducted in the context of cloud computing, right? So between the year of 2009 to 2012 to 2013, side-channel attacks in cloud computing was a very hot topic, and so that many researchers hope to derive some mechanism from the system level to defeat this attack, for instance, by modifying the hypervisor. The first work, the resource management for isolation in host cloud service, simply statically partition the last level cache into several regions, like 4 regions, and each region supports one virtual machine. But the problem is that really, because the mapping from the memory to the cache is deterministic, right? If you partition the cache, you also partition the memory. There's a huge waste of memory space. And this problem has been mitigated as well to some extent by the following the follow-up papers, like the DSNW paper and also the Unit Security 2012 paper, the Steele's mem. These two papers shows that how last level cache can be dynamically partitioned so that different virtual machines do not share the same cache set, right? Do not share the same cache set which contains the secret information. And then in 2016, a CCS paper further advanced this field of study by showing that, okay, with similar techniques can be implemented in the operating system. So basically, this paper shows that it is possible to modify the OS kernel to limit the number of cacheable memory pages belonging to a certain process or a container. And in this way, it is impossible for very, very difficult for the attackers to prime probe the code to occupy the entire cache sets. Okay, that's the key idea. Okay, and the last paper in this list, which is the one I want to spend a little more time to explain, which is called Catalyst: Defeating Glass-Level Cache Side-Channel Attacks in Cloud Computing. This is a work by leveraging the cache allocation technology, which is another hardware feature in some of the Intel processors, to partition the cache. So the CAT technology, cache allocation technology, allows the operating system or application to have exclusive use of certain cache lines or certain cache ways. This is a fine-grained partition of the cache, And some people believe this is the solution to all cache side channel attacks. I have been talking to people, and many of them believe this is the technology that can address the problem. But in fact, in order to use CAT technology in practice, a lot of work has to be done. For instance, in this HPC 16 paper, the authors demonstrate that in order to make use of this technology, because this technology only allows a limited number of partitions, right? In order to support more applications than the number of partitions, operating system has to multiplex the partition to multiple applications, and this is non-trivial. This is non-trivial, and also the CAT technology is not available in all Intel processors. Only available in a number of them. So still, our research needs to be done to address cache side channel attacks from the software layer. Another direction of research is the temporal partition from the system level. The key idea is to cleanse the cache upon context switch or disallow shared use of resources. There are some existing studies. 2 of them were done before the demonstration of CrossScore side channel attacks. So these 2 works basically focusing on the per core or the same core cache side channel attacks. And the key idea is again flush the cache whenever a context switch happens. And the last paper, I already mentioned that it is preventing partition the cache spatially by disallowing cacheability of certain memory pages. And another idea that is used in this paper is to monitor the states of each physical memory, whether it is exclusively used, it's simultaneously used by multiple parties, or something like that. By monitoring the states of the memory pages, the operating system can track whether 2 parties are frequently using the same memory page to conduct flash reload attack. That is the prerequisite of a flash reload attack. Okay, whether flash reload attack may take place, and if so, the same memory page can be duplicated, so that the attacker and the victim do not share the same physical cache line anymore. This is the temporal partition. Okay, open research questions. What are the open research questions? In my personal opinion, along the hardware, in the hardware solution, I believe some better cache coherence protocol, last level cache inclusiveness, or the cache validation instruction needs to be redesigned. And this may partition the last level cache to each core, right? You cannot do the cross-core cache side channel attacks again, which is a huge improvement. On the system level, I believe many of the studies have been focusing on cloud computing, how to prevent CrossWEA side channel attacks. But really, we need one solution. We need one solution that has the higher potential to be adopted by the cloud provider, if the cloud provider decided to adopt such technologies. Okay, it must work well with the existing cloud business model to allow protection for some customers, but with very low overhead to the rest. We still need such solutions. And on the system level, it is also possible to explore scenarios like the mobile operating systems or browsers, because these fields are less explored. For instance, can we do the cache partition in browsers to prevent JavaScript cache attacks? Or can we prevent Android level cache side channel attacks by partitioning the cache, right? Okay, this is the cache partition. And the second direction of cache side channel defense is to randomize the accesses. Okay, what does that mean? In the hardware level, some new hardware is designed to introduce randomness in the cache uses. For instance, can randomizing the cache line replacement in the new by designing new cache structures. There is a long line of research. Some of them were proposed to defeat cache prime probe attacks. Some are used to proposed to defeat flash reload attacks. Still, I personally believe hardware solutions will fundamentally address the cache settle problem. It is just difficult to convince the hardware vendors to adopt these solutions into their existing products. And in terms of software solutions, there have been some compiler-assisted approach to transform applications to randomize its memory access pattern. For instance, there are 5 such papers. That the first one, Ghost Rider, is a hardware and software combined approach to provide memory trace oblivious, which is S+15 paper. And this paper has been improved by another paper published in Unit Security 15, called Raccoon, closing digital side channels through obfuscated executions. And this Raccoon work leverages compiler-assisted approach to inject a decoy execution path and some randomness into the execution, so that the attacker cannot really figure out what is the true execution path. And Crane and out this NDSS 15 paper use a compiler-assisted approach to provide several replicas of the same execution path, so that at runtime randomly choose one replicas to execute. And in this way, the attacker cannot deterministically link the secret with the memory access pattern. And this type of randomness has been used in this type of cache sectional defenses. And open research questions. Well, in my personal opinion, leveraging randomness for sectional protection may need further investigation, right? And one reason is that the randomness is actually a target of sectionals. If you want to use randomness to protect sectional, you have to protect randomness itself. And whether this mechanism is effective is still questionable. One direction is to use entropy-based evaluation to estimate how much entropy this randomness-based approach introduced to the system. Right, and more studies, of course, is warranted in this direction. This direction has not been closed yet. A third direction in cache sectional defense, is to remove high-resolution timers. So the idea is that if there is no high-resolution timer, it is difficult to conduct a cache sectional attack, and also other access-driven sectional attacks. In terms of hardware solution, ISCA 2012 paper proposed new architecture to remove the fine-grained timekeeping in the hardware. And in the hypervisor level, several solutions has been proposed to eliminate the fine-grained timer in virtualization settings. I'm not going to introduce each of them in details. So the browser solutions, this is interesting. There are several papers that propose new browser design that mitigates timers in browsers. One such paper is using securities 2016 paper, and another paper is called deterministic browser, which will be presented in this conference, or probably the other rooms. Okay. Another research direction is runtime attack detection of the side channel attacks, and some papers have been done that for cloud, such as the ISCA 13 paper and the READ 16 paper, and then another area of research is in SGX, in which several work leverage compiler-assisted tools to compile the SGX program to detect the side channel attacks by themselves, because in the SGX side channel attack scenario, the operating system is not trusted. So the enclave programs has to be embedded with the detection code to detect such attacks all by themselves. And this work includes this line of work includes NDS 17 paper TSGX, Deja Vu, which is the HCCS paper, and also a recent unit secure paper leveraging the hardware transaction memory for the detection. If you're interested, we can take a look. Open research questions. Okay, if we want to use the runtime detection technique in a production system, the overhead needs to be reduced. How to apply the detection system in cloud computing, and how can convince the cloud provider to adopt this technology is a research question. Okay, and then what about a detection system in other systems, attack detection in other scenarios, like in browsers, mobile devices? Can we design any detection system to do that in those settings? And also, one major question that has not been addressed by any of this previous research is security policy. So side channel attack detection is similar to intrusion detection. We need a well-defined policy to tell us what to do upon detection, and especially if there are false positives. But this is another line of research. Well, the last research direction I want to talk about today is patching vulnerable programs. Okay. So if the program does not have any secret-dependent memory access pattern, no secret can be leaked through this type of cache side channel attacks. Existing solution, including how to completely eliminate the side channel vulnerabilities in binary programs. This effort includes 2005 paper, 2009 Auckland paper, and also a recent HCCS paper. But this is a very hard problem that has not been completely addressed yet. Okay, all this previous work targeting on specific types of cache side channels and has some limitations in some places. It's not completely solved yet. And another possibility is, say, we do not aim to eliminate the side channel vulnerability, but we detect whether there are vulnerabilities and we manually fix that. There are several papers. There are only 3 papers that I'm aware of. One is the Unix Security's 13 paper, which uses static analysis tool to analyze binary code and try to detect whether there are cache side channel vulnerabilities. Right. Another paper is more recent. It's called CacheD, published in Unix Security's 2017. It's a dynamic analysis tool analyzing one execution trace, use symbolic execution to detect whether there are information leakage in the cache. And the last paper is a CCS 17 paper, which will be presented tomorrow, use differential analysis to analyze the execution traces of the programs. And in this way, if there's a difference of execution trees for different inputs, there may be a side channel leakage. I welcome you to join the session tomorrow morning. All right, open research questions along this direction. The problem has not been solved. Okay, so I invite you to come and use programming language analysis techniques to address these problems. And also, we need new tools, whether it's compiler assistant tools or binary writing tools, and leveraging various techniques to improve the accuracy and improve coverage of the analysis in terms of the side channel vulnerability detection and mitigation. Okay, so this is the summary page. I've talked about 6 directions in the attack and the 5 directions in the defense. I wonder if you have questions. Thank you so much.
Can you put up the summary page?
I should put a thank you at the bottom here. Any questions?
John Criswell, University of Rochester. So there's been some work on using information flow techniques to build processor designs without these sort of side channel attacks. There's one, I think, from Edward Su from Cornell University, and Yinqian Zhang, who is now, I think, at Penn State University. What are your thoughts on this sort of approach?
First of all, I have to admit my knowledge of the works you just mentioned is a little bit limited. But let me try to explain in this way. I think all these approaches would be very interesting, especially if this approach can yield a practical adoption that can be used in practice. In terms of side channel attacks, typically attacks are targeting existing implementation, not attacking a prototype implementation. So that's how the attack paper works. But the defense papers, well, basically you can design new systems, new hardware that eliminate this type of information flow between different parties. I believe this should be a very, very interesting direction. I just hope that this direction can see the light, that one day it can be adopted in practice. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Lee from Intel Labs. So recently, there are some technology about the encrypted VM technology, such as AMD SEV. So do you think the cross-VM side channel attack you listed above still work, or there are some challenges here?
Okay, so your question is about AMD SEV technology,
Yeah.
which is, well, along the line of the trusted execution environment, similar to TrustZone, SGX, although the application model is slightly different from SGX.
Right.
I think my answer is that AMD SEV is relatively new compared to SGX. I believe in the next 1 or 2 years, when their products has reached the market, reached a broader market, we probably will see a few attacks against their system. I personally do not think their design addresses side channel per se. Okay.
Okay, so you think both the cache side channel and also control side channel? Like
I think both might work in their scenario.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Yeah.
In the research directions, you talked about how the side channel attacks pivoted from using same core to cross core because of hardware's architectures moving to inclusive LLCs. You don't list that in your defenses, the non-inclusive caches. Is that intentional, or is that a valid defense to have non-inclusive caches?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I didn't hear you clearly.
In your research directions, you talked about the attacks being facilitated, the cross-core attacks being facilitated due to inclusive LLCs. But in your defenses, you don't call that out as a defense, the use of non-inclusive caches. Is that?
I see. So your question is, so basically, I at the very beginning of my talk, I mentioned there is a trend of using non-inclusive cache in the next version of Intel processors. And I think your question is also whether Intel does that intentionally. I think there are people here from Intel who can answer the question better than.
My question was, is that a good defense for cross-core attacks going forward?
Well, my understanding is that this type of technique, to some extent, will make the attack very hard. So, for instance, the prime probe attack will be very, very difficult. The flush reload attack, it depends on whether the cell flush instruction will also be affected. If the cell flush instruction cannot invalidate the content of the other cores, then the flush reload attack can also be mitigated. So in general, I believe this is although I think non-inclusive cache was not adopted because of the side channel attack, side channel threats, but rather it's more a performance gain. But I think in general, it is a a right direction that can reduce the attack vector of cross-core side channel attacks. Okay.
Hi. Very nice summary. I'm Abhik Roy Chaudhary from NUS, National University of Singapore. I just wanted to make a quick comment related to the very last point that you made, the patching vulnerable programs. So there has been a lot of progress on modeling, the so-called microarchitectural modeling, in particular modeling the timing effects of caches for a large segment of caches as well as replacement policies. So I believe this progress could be used for the purpose of the verification of side channel attacks, as well as generating patches, because once you do the verification, as a byproduct of that, you can generate the patches. Yeah, so that's just a comment
Very good
related
comment,
to the
thank you.
last point that you made. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very good comment. I completely agree with you. And in fact, this Unix Security 2013 paper uses some cache model for the static analysis. And
Okay.
if their model can be improved to model more complex computer architecture, it will be more useful in terms of determining whether certain binary is vulnerable in this modern computer architecture.
That's
And
right,
I
yeah.
completely agree with
Yeah.
you.
So we have made some progress on that. We can take that offline. Yeah.
Sure.
But I feel this last area has a lot of potential. The very last one that you mentioned. Yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, interesting tutorial. So I'm Yan Solihin from NSF and NC State. Just I think being a computer architect, I have like a philosophical question about this, right? So essentially, the reason why there are all these side channel vulnerabilities is because the system allows resource sharing. You know, sometimes data sharing, but also cache sharing and so on. So so one way to think about it is that if there is a secure execution environment, shouldn't it have shouldn't it include an isolated execution environment that does not allow sharing, right? So that's one thought. And another thing is that if, let's say, the chip designers agree that of this, then it's actually quite easy to design, right? You can partition cache, you can disallow sharing and that kind of thing. Maybe the reason they have not done it is because they think this is not a hardware problem. So I was wondering what your thoughts are.
Okay, that's very interesting comment. Thank you so much. First of all, in the trust execution environment, so your comments is that what if we specific for this type of execution environment, the cache are isolated from other software components. Well, I tried to. I think this is a very interesting idea, but one problem is also is still the performance overhead. Right? Think about this: if you isolate the cache region for one particular execution on one processor, what does that mean to the other applications running on the same processor, right? So I don't know whether you have followed this line of research a bit more closely. So hyperthreading in enclave causes a lot of problems, but disable hyperthreading in data centers is a viable solution to defeat side channels. I think the answer is has some business incentive behind this. So the performance loss may not be sufficient to justify the security gain in this side channel attack scenario. I think the same answer also applies to your second comment, right? So there is a trade-off between security and performance. So in my research, I hope to demonstrate, if I do attack work, I hope to demonstrate practical attack that can make the vendors pay more attention to this type of threat, so they can start to leverage to balance the performance and the security in their product design. I think this is a very demonstrating practical attack is one very important research direction, which really can motivate the vendors to adopt this technology, even though it will hurt their performance of the product. I think your comment totally makes sense, but still, this is decision made by the hardware vendors and how they value the security and performance.
So I think you brought up an interesting point in that there is a trade-off between performance and security, and at any of the solutions, I think will incur some performance overheads, right? Either at the chip design or after the chip is taped out. So perhaps what the chip makers have to realize is that it's going to cost performance regardless. It's going to happen either at the when they design the chips or maybe after it's deployed. So okay.
Thank you.
Wei Zhang from Wednesday. Very cool tutorial. I like it. So in your tutorial, you mentioned so we could leverage, for example, Intel PT processor tracer for those kind of attacks. And one aspect you mentioned is using PT for fine-grained time measurement. So I'm just wondering, in terms of those kind of PT is just a debugging feature, right? And there are many other debugging features those kind of exist. I'm just wondering if there is a new attacking approach can leverage those kind of debugging features for to assist maybe cache side channel attacks. And also recently SGX, they also have those kind of debugging features, right? So I don't know if that's could be a research direction in terms of attacking.
That's a very good question. I think this is a very interesting research direction. I think one of the directions I mentioned covers this a little bit, but really did not flesh out this idea. I believe you're right. Leveraging some hardware features that are designed for improving performance or debugging programs in this type of side channel attacks may be an interesting future research direction, and I will look forward to your future paper along this line.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I'm Mohsen from Arizona State University. I started working on automatically finding side channel attacks in the binaries, and the thing that is interesting to me from this talk is that solutions, in the part of solutions actually, specifically in the compiler assisted solutions, they are actually, we should have the source code and then compile that with a GCC or with some flags. But what if we generally thinking we don't have the source code and we want to dynamically fixing this vulnerability? Okay, or library, actually, for example, an implementation of the AES, which uses the T-tables to make it fast, the encryption and decryption, now is running in the memory. And what would be, I just think about the idea that we just hooking some memory management functions like mmap, mallocs, and these kinds of functions that actually can initialize something in memory and is working with memory, and they have, there is somehow some round trips between the memory and the cache, okay? So we can get some control over this and adding some noise into the code, adding some noise into the cache patterns, because all of this happens because attacker can find some patterns in the cache.
Okay, that's a very interesting idea. I think it falls into the category of access randomization defense. You're sort of introducing some randomness in the defense. I think it's, completely makes sense. It just needs some more rigorous security evaluation. How much obfuscation is enough? To me, that is a question that really matters. There's no effective way to evaluate how much entropy you introduced, the system may open to another different types of attack.
You know, one idea would be, for example, just changing the place that the T table loaded. So I'm just unmapping the memory section that is T table is loaded or initialized, and after that I initialize it again and loaded it in the same section, or something like this, to just changing the patterns that an attacker can find, the time patterns in the cache, something like this.
Okay, let me conclude this. Conclude this conversation by asking you a question. Do you think address-based reorganization is a good enough defense against cache side channels? Do you think so, or do you believe it is not?
Actually, the side channel, I'm thinking about it generally. In the binaries, for example, we can find some time side channels. For example, we have a buffer that it asks for some characters. If we enter something like password, so it gives us okay. It checks each of the characters, and if the first character is the correct, so we can go to the next character, and if it's not correct, so we go into the fault trap. By checking I'm trying to add the time as a symbolic variable, and I'm trying to use the symbolic execution to merging the paths in the program that has the same output. And this is the way that I'm thinking about the side channel in the binaries. But in the cache, based on your actually presentation, I thought maybe it's possible to change some patterns dynamically, not even using the compiler.
Well, thank you for your comments. I think lunch is waiting for us. Let's talk. I'll take it offline. Okay.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much.